Hi guys, this is Dr. Brandt. Welcome to the Chapter 9 recorded lecture on the political environment. The political environment is the P in PESTLE. This chapter emphasizes the importance of the relationship between government and business. One of the reasons that international business is more complex than domestic business is because countries differ in many ways, including their political systems. You will see some overlap with the PESTLE components, especially with the legal and economic environment with this political environment component. And that is because the political, economic, and legal systems of a country are interdependent and collectively are referred to as the political economy. We will get to legal systems in Chapter 10 and economic systems in Chapter 11. And for now, we will begin with the political systems. The political system of a country shapes its economic and legal systems and consequently business. Thus, it's important to understand the nature of different political systems. The most common way to categorize political systems is democracy and totalitarianism. Democracy and totalitarianism are at different ends of the political dimension. Democracy refers to a political system in which government is by the people, exercised either directly or through elected representatives. Totalitarianism is a form of government in which one person or political party exercises absolute control over all spheres of human life and prohibits opposing political parties. Authoritarian, communist, and theocratic political systems are considered totalitarian in nature. Now we will talk about each of these political systems one by one, beginning with democracy. The pure form of democracy, as originally practiced by several city-states in ancient Greece, is based on a belief that citizens should be directly involved in decision-making. In complex, advanced societies with large populations, this is impractical. So, most modern democratic states practice representative democracy. In a representative democracy, citizens periodically elect individuals to represent them. These elected representatives then form a government whose function is to make decisions on behalf of the people. In a representative democracy, elected representatives who fail to perform this job adequately will be voted out of office at the next election. To guarantee that elected representatives are held accountable for their actions, there are usually several safeguards in place, including an individual's right to freedom of expression, opinion, organization, free media, regular fair elections, universal adult suffrage, limited terms for elected representatives, a fair court system that is independent from the political system, a non-political state bureaucracy, a non-political police force and military, and relatively free access to state information. The United States, Japan, and many Northern and Western European countries are examples of representative democracies. In contrast to a democratic political system, there are several types of totalitarian forms of government. We will begin with authoritarian, or sometimes it's called absolutist, forms of government. In these governments, all the constitutional guarantees on which representative democracies are built are denied to citizens. In most authoritarian states, power is in the hands of one or a few people. There are no checks and balances on those holding power. Political repression is widespread. Free and fair elections are lacking. Media is heavily censored, basic civil liberties are denied, and those who question the right of the rules to rule can even find themselves imprisoned or sometimes killed. Saudi Arabia is an example of an authoritarian country. Next is communism. While communism was widespread a few decades ago, it is in decline, and most Communist Party dictatorships have collapsed since 1989. However, some exceptions include China, Vietnam, Laos, North Korea, and Cuba. They deny many civil liberties. One political party dominates and controls all branches of the state and the media, and the production of most goods and services is owned and controlled by the state. However, globalization has led to most of these states opening up their economies to the rest of the world, as evident by China and Vietnam's rapid growth in global trade. The last form of government covered in this chapter is theocratic regimes. In theocratic regimes, religion or faith plays a dominant role in the government, and rulers are normally leaders of the dominant religion. The most common form of theocratic totalitarianism is based on Islam and is exemplified by states such as Iran. The Vatican is another example of a theocratic regime. Much debate surrounds which kind of political system is best for business. People in the West tend to believe that a representative democracy is best for business and economic growth. However, some totalitarian regimes have experienced rapid economic growth. For example, five of the fastest growing economies of the past 30 years, China, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong, had one thing in common at the start of their economic growth: undemocratic governments. At the same time, countries with stable democratic governments such as India experience sluggish economic growth for long periods. So, while this is a debatable topic, research suggests that governments committed to a market system and strong protection of property rights are most conducive to business, and typically those are democratic. We will get into this more in the legal and economic environments. For now, let's move on to functions of the state. Regardless of political system, there are various important functions carried out by the state with major implications for business. The boundaries of the state are not always clear-cut. Traditionally, governments perform functions to maintain law and order and protect the country from external attack. However, there are many other functions of the state, including preventing the collapse of the economic and financial systems, which we will see in Chapter 11, setting the legal and regulatory rules of the game for business, which we will get into in Chapter 10, public expenditure and taxation, international negotiator, internal and external security, arbitrator and judge, subsidizer, competitor, and even customer and supplier. However, not all states carry out these functions equally. The strength of the government in these functions provide a key element in a country's competitive position when seeking to attract business, as shown in Porter's Competitive Advantage of Nations model in Chapter 2. Additionally, political risk may be greater in some countries than others. Political risk is the likelihood that political forces will cause dramatic changes in a country's business environment that adversely affects the profit and other goals of a business enterprise. Political risk depends on the stability of a country and contains different types of risk. Political risk includes ownership risk, which exposes property and life, operating risk, which includes interference with ongoing operations, and transfer risk, which attempts to transfer funds between countries. If a government is not stable, there can be a dramatic change which could have huge business implications for firms doing business in that country. For example, a government could forcefully take ownership of private businesses through expropriation, confiscation, or domestication. Therefore, a stable and well-functioning political system is a very important consideration for business. Another important factor to consider is the size of the state relative to the economy. This is a matter of looking at the amount of money the state is spending and what it takes in tax as a proportion of the total income generated in the country. Um, States must cover a range of expenses, including infrastructure and welfare services such as education, healthcare, social security, etc. Without this spending, there would be no infrastructure in place for business to exist, and there wouldn't be a healthy and educated labor pool. However, this all must be paid for some way, and that is from taxes. From a business perspective, states have a lot of power due to its tax and spending powers. Therefore, these are all important variables for firms to pay attention to. Another topic of this chapter is the demise of the nation state. Some people argue that globalization has reduced the economic power of states and increased the power of MNCs. In addition, they argue that it strengthened the power of global and regional institutions such as the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, and the European Union. Undoubtedly, business interacts with an increasingly complex set of bodies. Yet, we see the continuation of nationalist sentiment, and nation states remain the primary political unit. Thus, looking at the nation level variables are still very important, but it's also important for firms to consider relevant global and regional institutions. One final point I want to make is that business can have an enormous influence on its political environment. It is common for firms to attempt to influence their political environment in a variety of ways, from lobbying to the donation of money and even with promises and threats. Of course, corruption and political stability are also important factors to consider for the political environment. And here is a list of some important political variables to consider. They include type of political system, political stability, um, freedom of the press, rule of law, levels of bureaucracy, corruption, regulation and deregulation trends, tax policy, trade and tariff controls, national security, environmental and consumer protection, fiscal policy, trade agreements, strength of political institutions, political funding, grants, and initiatives. Of course, there are others too. So that concludes the lecture on the political environment. Again, I want to emphasize that the political variables a firm should pay close attention to in the political environment depends on the country and industry of interest. As always, I am grateful for your time and attention. That's all for now. Bye-bye.